Hello, awesome lecturer and friends. Here are some of the things we are going to cover in this topic. The first content is the sources of supply chain complexity, which has a total of 8, which are network complexity, process complexity, range complexity, product complexity, customer complexity, supplier complexity, organizational complexity, and the last one is information complexity. The second content focuses on the cause of complexity, while the third content focuses on product, design, and supply chain complexity, and the fourth content is mastering complexity. Now, let's see the complexity of supply chain. The first complexity is network complexity, which is the more nodes and links that exist in a network, which clearly the more complex it becomes. As a result of outsourcing non-core activities, many companies are today much more reliant on external suppliers of goods and services. Those external supplies also are dependent upon a web of second-tier suppliers and so on. There is a strong likelihood that the focal firm at the center of the network will not even be aware of many of the second or third-tier supplies that feed their upstream supply chain. Next is process complexity. Often, these processes have been developed in a haphazard way and have been added to and modified to reflect current requirements and as a result have become more complex. This complexity is manifested in processes with multiple steps, often performed in series rather than in parallel. There is a need for a constant review of process structure and a consequent re-engineering if this pervasive source of supply chain complexity is to be kept to a minimum. The third complexity is range complexity. Most business organizations find that the range of products and services that they offer to the market has a tendency to grow rather than reduce. Typically, as more variants are added to a range, the demand per variant will reduce with a subsequent impact on forecast accuracy. An example, Ford Motor Company. Consider the difference between the Ford Motor Company at the time of Henry Ford I producing a single model. Ford, even in today's troubled markets, offers a vast range of models with extensive options. Next is product complexity. The design of products can have a significant impact on supply chain complexity. It can be argued that the supply chain begins on the drawing board, and components can directly or indirectly impact total life cycle costs as well as agility and responsiveness. Product complexity can arise because the number of components or sub-assemblies is high or because there is little commonality across the bills of materials for different products. For example, Motorola. At Motorola, all new product ideas are screened for complexity before they can be considered for commercialization. In the past at Motorola, there was often little commonality of parts across the range. Next is customer complexity. Customer complexity arises as a result of too many non-standard service options or customized solutions. The costs of serving different customers can vary significantly. This is because each customer will exhibit different characteristics in terms of their ordering patterns. For example, frequency of orders, size of orders, and delivery requirements, and so on. Even though from a sales and marketing perspective, there may be advantages to be gained from offering a range of options to customers. Using tools such as activity-based costing can help identify those customers whose cost to serve is high relative to the revenue that they generate. Next is supplier complexity. The size of the supplier base can add to supply chain complexity by increasing the number of relationships that must be managed as well as increasing total transaction costs. It is unlikely that this degree of closeness can be achieved across a diverse supplier base and hence the need for rationalization. Too high a level of dependence on just a few critical suppliers can be dangerous. Instead, a better option, if available, is to have a lead supplier across a category of products who takes responsibility for the management of that category across a number of suppliers. Next is organizational complexity. Most businesses have traditionally organized around functions and departments. A further problem is that over time the functions have a tendency to become silos with their own agendas, and they can lose sight of the fundamental purpose of the business. The challenge is to find a way to break through these silos and to reshape the organization around the key value creating and value delivery processes. Such process-oriented businesses are horizontal rather than vertical in their orientation. They are cross-functional and hence there is a stronger emphasis on teams and on process improvement in terms of speed and reliability. The second content is the cost of complexity. Most businesses will find if they perform an 80-20 analysis that they have a long tail of customers who, while significant in numbers, actually contribute very little to overall profitability. To a certain extent, this is the approach that Amazon has taken, enabling it to offer a vast range of book titles, but with minimal inventory. The third content is product design and supply chain complexity. It is important to recognize that often a significant source of supply chain complexity is the actual design of the product itself. These are some of the ways that product design decisions can affect supply chain complexity. First, time to market and time to volume. Decisions on the functionality of products can increase manufacturing complexity and reduce flexibility and responsiveness. Next is added complexity through lack of commonality. Decisions on product design impact the bill of materials. Low levels of component commonality will add complexity. Next is increased replenishment lead times. Some design decisions will determine the choice of supplier and therefore could impact replenishment lead time. For example, where the supply source is offshore. Moving on is supply chain vulnerability. Again, if the design decision involves unreliable supply sources, this could potentially increase the chance of supply chain disruption. Finally is after-sales support. For those products requiring after-sales support, for example, service parts, the design of the product will have implications for inventory levels. The last content is mastering complexity. A good starting point to identifying the source of complexity is to review the 8 categories previously identified. There are 5-stage process for bringing the supply chain under control. First is to understand the sources of complexity and to undertake Pareto 80-20 analysis, and also to focus on the long tail and which elements of complexity add value and which do not. Last is to seek eliminate non-value adding complexity. In conclusion, complexity is the enemy of an efficient supply chain. As complexity increases, the value of scale decreases. The answer to complexity is not adding more complexity. Attacking the right complexity drivers yields more effective and sustainable improvement. Thank you. That is all for the topic of complexity and supply chain.